Hey there, family. Welcome back to Disciple Makers. I'm Joey Hungerford, and today I'm going to be talking with you about worldwide disciple-making movement statistics. I'm going to share some of my own research with you, and then I actually want to share a clip from Jim Long. Jim Long works with Beyond.org, and he was recently on a coaching call I'm a part of with the eLife Network, so be sure to check out his info in the description down below. In 2014, Gordon Conwell Center for the Study of Global Christianity estimated the worldwide cost of a baptism to be $753,000. They forecasted that by 2025, the worldwide cost per baptism would be $1.4 million. Right now, in 2023, the U.S. estimate is that it costs $1.2 million to baptize somebody in our nation. Right now, in my own family of churches, I would estimate our cost per baptism to be around $10,000, which means if I wanted to plant a church of 100 people, I need $1 million. That means it would take millions upon millions of dollars to make even a small dent in the population of my state baptizing disciples in Jesus Christ. These costs have led to what some call the Great Evangelical Recession, where in the US we have more of a church closing movement than a church planting movement. Tom Rainer says that we reach one person per year per every 85 churches in the US. Mike Breen says that studies suggest more than 1,000 US pastors quit their job every month. And according to Lifeway research, less than 10% of evangelicals share their faith every month. Meanwhile, there is hope. 60% of Christianity lives in the global South. And though they only control 17% of Christian wealth, and the majority is in the US, it only costs 67 cents per baptism in these disciple-making movements. How is that possible? The New Testament church with unschooled ordinary men grew from as little as 25,000 people to 20 million people within 2 centuries. And they did it without Bibles and youth groups and seeker-sensitive services, and buildings and paid staff and commentaries and worship bands. How did they do this? By the end of John Wesley's lifetime, 1 in 30 people in England had become a Methodist. And between 1776 and 1850 in the US, Methodists went from 2% of the population to 30% of the population. 1 out of 3 people. How did they do it? Against incredible persecution, the underground church in China grew from less than 2 million believers to over 120 million believers in less than 70 years. Today, an estimated 25,000 Chinese are being baptized every single day through these underground movements. By 2030, China will have more Christians living in it than any other nation on earth, which means if you want to get along with others in heaven, you better start learning to speak Chinese. Currently, there are 3.7 times as many Protestants in Africa as there are in North America. There may be 1 million or more people turning from Islam to Christianity every single year, seeing entire mosques converted. In sub-Saharan Africa, in the last 15 years, more Muslims have been brought to Christ than in the last 15 centuries times 10. These movements have a 23% average annual growth, doubling in size every 3.5 years. Meanwhile, traditional Christianity grows at 1.7% annually. That means that these disciple-making movements, these revival gospel Jesus movements, are the only strategy out there to keep up with worldwide population growth. Matthew 24:14 says this, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Through these disciple-making movements, it's actually possible that in a single generation, Christianity could become visible all around the world. Disciple-making movements are turning the world upside down. But for a deeper dive on these statistics, here's Jim Long.
How we define a movement is at least 4 generations of churches in multiple streams, growing and adding another generation in a timely fashion. Size, so I don't use a size measure, but a lot of the people that report to me do. So by default, I kind of do use a size measure, and it's generally 100 churches and 1,000 believers. So another way that our numbers are very conservative is several of the movements don't report anything under 100 churches or 1,000 believers in their streams. So several of the movements have more stuff going on. They just don't report it until it reaches that 1,000 believer threshold in that particular stream. Usually it's bounded to a sub-country place, like a province or a language or a people group or a city. So it's not movement by country, it's more movement by province or movement by language in a given country. Those are the kinds of streams we look at. I report what's reported to me. We don't just take spurious reports off the web of movements or things in books or publicity materials. Basically, the reports have to be confirmed, which means that anybody that I am taking data from somebody's been out to see them, somebody's talked to them, they're in a coaching relationship with someone. We're collecting information from them on an ongoing basis. There's like I said, about 40 families that we presently gather information from. I know that there's more out there that we don't yet have. So I usually tell people that what we've got here is the floor, not the ceiling. We're fairly conservative. 1,965 are known to be, actually, I think it's 1967. I think I copied this presentation from a slightly older presentation. So the correct number would be 67. But in the event, it's right there. It's 1965, 67, pretty close to 2000. We probably actually are over the 2000 line, but I want to be sure of that. I want to have a significant amount of data in before I do that, because when I trigger that 2000 line, there's going to be a lot of people who pay attention to that. So I'd like to be well over the 2000 line before I put that number out there. So this is roughly the breakdown. Now, remember what I said about the CPM continuum. Level 1, which is this first column here, there's 1,775 teams at that level. That's that team level, where they maybe have seen a little fruit, but it's probably not generational fruit yet. So they're kind of just getting started. Fruit, this level 2 to 4 stage here in the middle, there's 1,738 teams at that one. And that's where they're seeing generational fruit. They've got some momentum, but they haven't reached movement stage yet. And then 1965 are at that DMM stage from level 5 to level 7. The important thing about this particular graph, I think, is that there's a time progression that occurs here. The ones that are seeing fruit, the 2 to 4 stage, they are naturally progressing. In fact, we've already seen this over the last 5 years. They are naturally progressing toward that DMM stage. In fact, in the next 12 to 18 months, several of these 1738 will slide into that DMM category because they're seeing fruit and they're growing and they're adding additional generations. So in all, about 114 million disciples are in those movements. Okay. Now this number is professing. Not all of them are baptized. Some movements take longer to baptize than others. Some baptize very, very quickly. Others decide to, have a period of discipleship before they actually reach baptism. Different movements do things in different ways. So I'm always careful to say, if you're comparing this number to any number in other research, make sure you're comparing it to the professing number, not to the baptized number, which means that over 1% of the world's people, the total world population, are presently disciples in a rapidly reproducing movement. I think we're approaching 1.5% at this point, which is an incredible thing to think about. In our world today, and especially in the unreached world, 1 out of 100 people in the world are disciples in a rapidly growing movement. It's a fantastic number. They are in 8.6 million churches, not seeker groups. So we're not even counting, seeker groups, discovery groups. That means that there are more churches in movements than there are in traditional denominations in the world today. Now, it's maybe a little apples and oranges, because obviously house churches and small churches of 15 to 20 people in a movement is different from, say, a church of 200 to a church of 2,000 in a denomination. 14 disciples per church on average. This number varies by country, between 14, 15, 20, something like that. The mean, if you take the total number of believers and divide by the total number of movements, you'll get about 50 to 60,000 disciples per movement on average. Now, a lot of movements are smaller. They're in the 1,000 to 10,000 range, and a handful of movements are quite large. The largest in the world single movement that I know of is somewhere over 30 million believers in that particular movement. So we have a pretty large range, but it does appear that you can expect any typical movement to grow to a size of between 50 to 100,000 people. So this is the distribution of those movements out by world region. So the red bars are the level 1 teams that are getting started. Those green bars in the middle are the ones that are seeing some fruit but haven't reached movement altogether. And the dark blue bars to the right are the level 5 full movements. Now, a few things stand out here, of course. East Africa, West Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, these are and even Western Asia, these are the places where movements are really going quite strong. They're also the places where movements have been going the longest. A lot of times, people have said, well, that movements, it can work over there, but it won't work here. And then they tried it here, and lo and behold, it worked. And then someone else in a different place would say, well, it worked in those 2 places, but it won't work here. And then they tried it, and lo and behold, it works. What this chart, it's interesting with this chart, is there are now teams and fruit in every UN region of the world, with the exception of Polynesia. It's the only place where we haven't had teams and movements just yet. We've had a lot of stuff thrown at movements in the last 30 years. And if we continue to have a lot of stuff thrown at us in the next 20 years, might we not see the same kind of growth? Okay, well, if that is the future, then this would basically be the projection. In 2035, we would have another 10x point. And in 2045, we would have another 10x point. Now, let me give a caveat. If only there were enough people in the world for this to happen. The World Christian Database estimates that there would be 3.5 billion Christians in the world in 2050. That's their long-term projection. 20% growth, not even 23, let's just back it off. 20% growth would be 3.5 billion disciples in movements in 2043. Would basically double Christianity at that point. The UN estimates 9.7 billion people in the entire world by 2050. 20% growth would reach 70 billion disciples in movements by 2050. Well, okay, all right. So it's math, and we're extending the math out very, very far. And why would we do that? Obviously, you can't have more disciples than you can have people unless aliens start to arrive, which, that's just ridiculous, okay? If movements continue to do even a conservative version of what they've done for the past 3 decades, what's going to happen is this. They're going to grow towards saturation points. They are going to inevitably start slamming up against very, very challenging barriers. 240 countries, 39 have movements that with one 10x multiplication, that country would be 100% Christian. 90 have movements where with 2 10x multiplications, the country would be 100% Christian. And then so on down, 50 with 3, 27 with 4, 17 with 5. 4 countries are less than 1 10x multiplication away from 100% Christian right now. These countries, 39 plus 90 plus 50, those countries right there, in a single generation, in 30 years, could be completely altered and will completely alter the trajectory of the world when that happens.
Thank you for watching that video. If you want to learn more about disciple-making movements, be sure to check out Jim's website, beyond.org, and the eLife Network. And if this video blessed you, please subscribe, comment, and share about it with your friends. God bless.